everyone. I'm going to be speaking to you today about the Aries Equinox, which is happening on the 20th of March. So that's the spring equinox in the Northern Hemisphere and the autumn equinox in the Southern Hemisphere. And as I'm filming this, I'm filming it a little bit early on February the 26th, and we are just entering yet another very intense, that word again, and volatile period of energy. We're still within this eclipse corridor between the solar eclipse on the 17th of February and the total lunar eclipse coming up on the 8th of March. But on top of that, we have some very combustible and volatile aspects as well. Exact tomorrow, it's already operational today, but exact tomorrow we have a square between Mars and Uranus at 27 of Aquarius Taurus, and then the following day on Saturday the 28th, Mars exactly conjuncts the solar eclipse degree from the 17th of February of 28 degrees of Aquarius. So it re-energizes all that was about. And I think we can clearly see that from that time, that solar eclipse was in Aquarius, square to Uranus, the ruler of Aquarius, all about truth and awakening. And we've had a lot of truth starting to come to light since that time. This is just the beginning. As I've said, I think we're going to have a whole avalanche of truth, pretty gritty stuff to process if you have not been aware of this before. People in high public positions are resigning very rapidly and almost by the hour. And of course, this is exactly the kind of thing that astrology anticipated. This has to happen as part of the awakening process. We can't miss that step because we have to see what has happened. We can't just paper over it and create a better world on those very rotten foundations. So this is going to continue, and it can be quite destabilizing for some. So find those simple ways that for you, even if it's just closing your eyes and dropping into your breath, taking 10 long, slow breaths 3 or 4 times a day, even that, bare feet on the earth, being in nature, all of those things will really help to kind of decompress a lot of this very overstimulated mental energy, because Aquarius also indicates that we're going to have a lot of mental stimulation. And so we have to find ways to, despite that, achieve our mastery. And so this is also very revolutionary energy as well. I think the truth and awakening leads to potentially greater rebellious or revolutionary behavior. You can see clearly how that would happen. And so we are in a whole series of new beginnings. And therefore this Aries equinox that I'm going to be speaking about isn't just a regular Aries equinox. And as you may know, whenever the sun enters 0 of Aries, the very first degree of the zodiac, that is considered the beginning of the astrological new year. So it happens every year around about March 20th, March 21st. This year it's going to be the 20th, but this is not just a regular Aries equinox, because we are within such an incredibly potent period of endings and beginnings, as I've talked at enormous length in the last 2 years or so, because we've had a whole series of important events. You know, we've had the end of the precessional cycle, the end of the 12,000 year descending yuga cycle, the end of the Kali yuga cycle, which was said to end by Bibu Dev Misra on the last Aries equinox in 2025. We have had that very powerful solar eclipse on the day of the Chinese New Year. Now, the Chinese New Year always begins on the second new moon of the year, but this time it was a solar eclipse, so that makes it much more potent. And that began, of course, the year of the fire horse, and it's also a 1 year in numerology. And also we had on the 20th of February, the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. So this is the beginning, and although that conjunction, as I've explained many times, happens round about every 36 years, it has been over 6,000 years since it's happened at 0 of Aries. So that's what makes this different. And so this is just the beginning, I believe, very, very, very deeply in my bones, of a whole new era for humanity. So, you know, if the 20th of February for you came and went, don't think astrology doesn't work, because it's just the very beginning of a massive new episode for humanity as we shift back up into higher consciousness. You know, this is a once in many lifetimes period in history that we're going through, and books will be written about this period in history. They truly will. It's hard to overstate how powerful the energy is, and I think so many of us can feel that. And also, of course, just a few days before the Aries equinox, we're going to have Jupiter on its final flyby to, Three-Eye Atlas, correction, on its final flyby to Jupiter, our strange interstellar visitor that is not on an orbit. We believe it's just a one-time flyby and will not come back to our solar system again. And even with comets, we don't quite know what this is. I happen to think it's a being that has higher consciousness in it, as other people do, I know, and you may feel that too. Even with comets, they deposit material on Earth and on us that come from far-flung galaxies. But I think Three-Eye Atlas is going to do that in a much bigger way. I truly think it's going to be seeding some very important ingredients for our evolution, partly because the time at which it's arriving. Apart from the fact many people can tune in, you know, I had a beautiful conversation with Susie Miller. That's on my channel, really magical conversation with Susie, who's able to tune in. Kelly Kolodny has tuned in and also channeled Three-Eye Atlas. You know, many people online have done this. And so there is a sense of just incredible ancient wisdom coming through. It's also activating Jupiter at its most exalted degree of the whole zodiac at 15 of Cancer. As it passes Jupiter, and at that point it will also be, Jupiter is conjunct Sirius, our spiritual star. So, you know, there's just so much in here. Jupiter in Cancer is very connected to ancient wisdom and ancestral wisdom as well. So, you know, this is multi-layered. We are in exceptional times with all of these endings and beginnings. And when we have the Aries equinox, when the sun moves into 0 of Aries each year, it really, as I say, is the beginning of the astrological new year. And it's like it sets up the zeitgeist, if you like, for the next 12 months. It sets up the first layer of paint on the canvas, let's say, for the next 12 months, on top of which we will impose we will paint the many transits and solstices and the other equinox and, you know, all of the things that are happening, myriad of them through these next 12 months. But that is kind of the base layer of paint, if you like. That's a good way to look at it. And often astrologers over the next 12 months will look back at the Aries equinox to really refresh their memory on the tone it was setting. And my goodness, there's some very strong messages on this. Because, of course, the sun entering 0 of Aries is reactivating that Saturn-Neptune conjunction that has just happened, 044 of Aries on the 20th of February. So let us take a look at this chart, because it's extraordinary in many ways. So as always, I set this chart for London. England, this is where I live, so ignore the clock face, ignore the houses if you're not in that geography. And we're just going to focus on where the planets are in their signs and their aspects to each other. Now, we have an enormous focus on Pisces and Aries here. In fact, if we include, the dwarf planets and Eris and Chiron, the Centaur, etc., we have 9 orbiting bodies in Aries. I don't remember ever seeing that in my astrological lifetime. And of course, at this time of year, we always get the sun plus the personal planets of Venus, Mars, etc., moon moving through Aries. We don't always have Chiron and Eris, although they've been there quite some time. Eris, remember, has a 560-year orbit. It's been there for a long time. But we also have Saturn and Neptune, and they are rarely co-present in Aries. So, and with the discovery of the dwarf planets, such as Manwe that I've highlighted there, and Salacia that I'm going to talk about as well, that has really led to this enormous grouping. And it's just because if we also consider just the elements, we have a huge amount in water and fire. Huge. Firstly, just see where the houses of Pisces and Aries fall in your chart. These will fall across 2 houses, possibly 3 houses in your chart. If you don't know what I'm talking about, please download a free birth chart from my website. You can then go to this link below the video and get a 2-part video series that you can watch to infinity, as many times as you like, to understand where these points in your chart that I refer to fall in your own birth chart and what that means for you in your astrological journey. And this isn't a personalized birth chart analysis. These are teaching videos and they start from 0. But those houses for you are going to be very activated at this time. We only have one planet. If we just take our regular traditional planets, we have one planet in Earth, which is Uranus, still in Taurus. We'll move out of Taurus on the 26th of April into Gemini. And we have one planet in air of our traditional planets, which is Pluto in Aquarius. That's an air sign. All the rest are in fire and water, so pretty steamy combination. And this really describes not only our emotional nature, I would say at the moment, or the collective. The collective is feeling pretty steamy right now about many things, but it also reflects the extreme weather that we are having in many places. Some of it natural, some of it very unnatural, I would say. The enormous amount of flooding we have had, in so many geographies. New Zealand has had enormous storms and flooding. Australia, Portugal has been just shocking in the amount of flooding. Spain, southwest France. I know some people down there who've had to boil their swimming pool water to have water, water everywhere, but not a drop to drink, as the old poem goes. Because there was no water, no power. It has been very damaging and devastating. So a lot of flooding and also a lot of extreme heat, fires. This has happened in Australia. It's happened in some parts of America, but at the same time, they have had, I think, 3 massive Arctic blasts, which are very rare for in their severity in northeastern US. So, and even where I live, it's been pretty flooded, and southwest England in particular, there's been a lot of flood damage. So yeah, many geographies struggling with this. So, and sadly, I think that is likely to continue. So do everything you can to prepare for those extreme events. And this is also partly going through Gaia going through her own upgrade as well, her own rebirth. So I do think it's very wise, and I've mentioned this before. Thinking of my friends in southwest France, if you just buy a very inexpensive camping filter bottle that you can buy for $15 online, and you can literally find a river or a lake somewhere, even in extreme circumstances, and you can use that to filter. I mean, they usually filter up to something like 50,000 gallons of water, or litres of water. It's an extraordinary amount. And they're so inexpensive. That would be really a wise, if you needed it, you would be so grateful that you had it. So I do think that water in some areas could become more precious, a more precious commodity. And I think there are other spiritual reasons for that, which I'll come on to. I think oil could become more expensive. And as I've mentioned in previous videos, I think, well, certainly when Neptune has been in a fire sign before in the 1920s and the 1970s, there has been a lot of inflation. Neptune in Aries tends to fuel inflation. So remember, everything else I'm saying here is just giving that base layer for the next 12 months. This isn't just a one-day chart. Well, it is a one-day chart, but it's setting the tone for the next 12 months. I want to keep emphasizing that, so you don't just think this is for one day that I'm talking about this Aries equinox. Things are going to happen fast. We know that with the firehorse energy. We know that the firehorse energy plus the Aries energy is about initiation, ignition, rebirth, confidence, sovereignty, independence, passion, innovation, clarity. It's very clear. People who have strong Aries emphasis, they're just very clear. I know who I am. It's very simple, direct, very clear. A lot more clarity coming in. Creativity too. Freedom, a big one. Pluto in Aquarius, all this Aries energy, freedom. And it's going to be fast with a lot of dynamic outer events. If you have Aries emphasis in your chart, or people who have that, they want to move quickly. They're very physical. Everybody else is too slow. Everybody else is just way too slow. They tend to be very quick in how they move around the world. So there's a real speed element in outer events. And those of you who know a little bit of astrology, knowing the sign of Aries and its ruler Mars, will say, well, isn't this warlike? Doesn't it feed war? Yes, if you want to focus on that, it does. Yes, it does. There's most certainly a timeline for more war. Absolutely. But are you going to feed that? That's our individual choice. It is softened somewhat by the ruler of Aries being in Pisces. Mars is in Pisces. And I'm going to come to that in a while. So it is softened. Mars at this point is not in Aries. It moves into Aries certainly by April. So another way you could look at this rather than war is humanity rising. Humanity rising. And that doesn't have to be aggressive and shouty and placards on the street. It can just be warmth. I am really clear what's been going on over all these years, and I'm just going to step into my own sense of sovereignty, power, confidence, and things are going to be different from this point on. I really feel that in the zeitgeist. I'm sure you can too. So, and this is important also because anything from 0, and I've said this many times before, anything from 0 to 2 degrees of the cardinal signs, Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, is on the world axis. So it throws things onto the public stage in a bigger way. So again, this isn't just a regular Aries equinox because we have the Sun conjunct Neptune here on the world axis, also conjunct Saturn, but they are both on the world axis, 0 to 2 degrees of Aries. And so and it's the first time, by the way, that they will have been at that point since 1861, which is when Neptune last entered Aries. That was the beginning of the US Civil War within a day as well, interestingly. Now, Neptune does come back in the later months of this year to 1 degree, 136 of Aries by December. But this is, and it stays, within those 2 degrees until I think late February 2027, and then Neptune moves on. So, but this is really over the next 12 months, particularly now and then the later months in the year, when we are going to have Neptune at that world degree, world axis. And therefore that throws all things Neptunian onto the public stage in a bigger way. So you probably do this part of the video yourself. What are they? Well, they're issues around water, toxicity in water, flooding. We're seeing that all over the place. The seas, the oceans. How do we clear up the pollution? Deception, lies, ringing any bells right now? Illusion, the media, pharmaceutical drugs, blood, toxicity, our immune systems. This could, or with its ruler, Mars, being in Pisces, this could suggest aggression at sea or water wars, even wars over water. So we will wait and see how the year unfolds, the next 12 months unfold. But also this speaks of great compassion, Sun conjunct Neptune. I think, we are really birthing a great sense of compassion when we are becoming witness to some absolute horrors, more than some of us ever imagined, that have been happening in the world. A profound compassion for all of our human and animal brothers and sisters. This is also about spiritual activism. It's being about your own spiritual hero. It's developing much stronger intuition. I talked in the last video about how we are really shifting. That was the total lunar eclipse video in Virgo, which is ruled by Mercury, shifting from the mind to the heart and to the intuition. And this is all about highlighting our intuition, our dreams, and our emotional intelligence. Those are our really going to be our navigational tools moving forwards, how we will feel energy rather than use the mental function. That will only come in secondarily. So we'll have a much greater sense of oneness and connection to all that is. So there's some really beautiful aspects to this. And it's Neptune in Aries is taking action on your dreams. What have you been dreaming about and yearning for? While Neptune was in Pisces, and now it's in Aries, we can start to take action, but make that action, Saturn, realistic, pragmatic, for the long term. Whatever we're building is going to be for the long term. And we have a beautiful aspect, conjunction here, exact conjunction by degree, Saturn to dwarf planet Manwe at 4:59 of Aries. And Manwe was one of the original archangels with his wife Vada, who created our world. And Manwe and Vada represent the forces of light, and Manwe in particular oversees the triumph of light over dark. And they're both being very activated at this Aries equinox. And it's all about divine help and inspiration, which I think more and more of us are feeling. And so it is so interesting here that Vada is at 1 degree of Capricorn. So Vada is tightly square, 90 degrees, tightly square the Sun, Neptune, also Saturn, and in the original myth, Manwe. So this is very powerful. Manwe and his wife Vada created our world, our universe originally. So it's almost here, they are here for the rebirth, doing it the second time around. And Vada was the queen of the stars and the elves. She placed the stars in our heavens. She placed the sun and moon in our heavens and set them on their course. She's very connected to the elemental realm. So I think she will really awaken the elemental realm for us. And it is said that she had such immense radiance and light that it was actually hard to see her because there was so much light around her. She was a light being. She lived in the elemental realm. And of course, this Manwit and Vada come from the creational myth, from the great works of J.R.R. Tolkien. He was professor of Anglo-Saxon at Oxford. He was a great scholar of Old and Middle English. And he said he felt very connected to Merlin energy. And when he was writing about the inner earth beings, which other people are starting to channel now, for instance, my good friend Martha Alter Hines, the American astrologer, channels Ben Huis, who is an inner earth being. Tolkien said that he was operating not from imagination, but from memory. Isn't that interesting? He was operating not from imagination in his great works, but from memory. You know, his great works of not just the Silmarillion, but the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings. You know, that realm is awakening or reawakening for us now. The sun is also in an exact sextile 0 of Aries to 0 of Gemini to Sedna, with an 11,400 year orbit. So, and Sedna will, you know, very gradually start to move on from this point, but incredibly slowly. But here, it's an exact sextile. Sextile is very positive as an aspect, and it's about opportunity, really. And this, Sedna to me, is the planet of metamorphosis, the dwarf planet of you know, think of her myth that when her fingers were chopped off by her father, she floated down to the deep and transmuted into a sea goddess, and her fingers became new beautiful sea creatures like whales and dolphins. And so for me, she represents biological metamorphosis that Richard Rudd has been talking about. I've mentioned that several times, that other people are now talking about. I talked just last night, actually, I had a chat with Nancy Rebecca, who was talking about how she's clearly seeing our shift to the light body. Kelly Kolodny is seeing this too. And the conjunction to Uranus is igniting this change of state. That will become exact in late May. I'm going to be talking to Alan Clay, who runs Dwarf Planet University, about that. But it is very tight, 2 to 3 degree orb here. So Uranus is the igniter of that change of state. We are in this right now. We are in it right now. And what is adding to that biological metamorphosis is all the work that's going on with regenerative medicine and stem cell medicine. And I very much associate Hermia in Scorpio with that. You know, the injection in my knee with my own stem cells, the platelet-rich plasma injection. A lot is happening with stem cells in South Korea as well. Very early stages, I think, but they're investigating stem cell regeneration for growing new teeth, growing new cartilage in your knees, you know, many aspects. This is enormously exciting. And of course, Hermia in its square to Pluto is all about accelerating that biological transformation. I think this is also linked to biohacking, which over the next 12 months is going to become a really big thing. That's also suggested by Mars being in a quintile, a very creative aspect, a 72-degree aspect to Uranus. Uranus is about technology, and of course it's in Taurus, which is not only the Earth, but our own physical bodies, and suggesting innovation and renovation, if you like, for our physical bodies. And biohacking is really about the very clever understanding of how we can either change our eating patterns or our diet or our supplements or a combination of those or our exercise patterns, really understanding things like the mitochondria in our body, how we can boost those, how we can boost our own stem cells naturally, how we combine all of those things, fasting, etc. All of these things fall under the realm really of biohacking, how we can become healthier beings very naturally, not through artificial means, but through understanding of our physiology to live much longer. And I think Hermia is all about longevity. I think We are the baby boomers, the people born with Pluto and Leo, are going to be the first older generation to experience much longer life. And of course, the generations that come after that will experience that too. Also, innovations in agriculture, food production, financial systems, big time. There's so much to say in this chart. We also have the dwarf planet Gong Gong, which I squeezed in, which is spelt all one word, Gong Gong, pronounced Gong Kun, 6 degrees of Pisces, very tightly conjunct the North Node, our collective soul's path of growth. And Gong Gong is the Chinese god of water, but also very associated with flooding. So again, this brings up flooding, but I also think that it brings up ways to deal with flooding, which Gong Kun was also associated with. And also, I think this is very much bringing water in a different way, in a bigger way, into our understanding as we move forwards in these next 12 months. I was just part of a wonderful webinar over 10 hours long, which you can still buy on her website, with the wonderful Veda Austin and all the incredible, beautiful work she is doing with water. And, it's just amazing that it's now becoming very clear that water is leading our consciousness. It's not only consciousness itself, it is leading humanity's consciousness. And because some of the ice and the snow in ancient mountains like the Himalayas starting to melt, Kelly Kolodny has talked about this in her channeling with Archangel Raphael, it is bringing into the universal water supply ancient wisdom that the ascended masters embedded in the ice and the snow, so goosebumpy, for these times, to bring back that ancient wisdom which they developed back to become available to humanity now. I mean, so incredibly exciting. So I think our understanding of water as a consciousness, how we need to bless our water, and that's highlighted elsewhere, which I'll come to in a moment, is, we will start to interact with water and not just consume it as a resource, but connect with it as source, as a higher consciousness which is leading us. And I'm viewing water very, very differently since my interactions with Veda and also Archangel Raphael's channeling. Because another aspect related to water is Salacia. I've put the glyph here, which is the seashell, and I thought that was clear enough for us to start to remember now. Salacia at 11 of Aries, and Salacia is mermaid energy. She was the wife of Neptune in myth. She's connected to the not only salt water, but the shimmering sunlight and moonlight on the seas. I believe she's very connected to photonic light. And this is something that I haven't been able to talk to Veda about it, but it came up in the webinar, that the brilliant nonverbal autistic people were referring to glints, which were like electrical impulses in the water. And as I understand it, you have to have salt water, Salacia, the seawater, to create that electrical charge, because a couple of years ago, Veda was kind enough to do some crystallography on the word Salacia. She didn't know anything about the word Salacia, and it came up as very similar to a hydroglyph linked with electrical charge. There's something vast. There's something vast about this that I'm not quite there yet, but there's something huge in this about greater understanding of these next 12 months of light information in the water and how we can boost the light quotient in the water. Now, partly that is sending love to the water. Isn't it interesting that Salacia is actually at the midpoint of Saturn and Venus? You can see, just very simple maths here. Saturn is at 4 degrees, then 11 degrees, that's another 7, then onto Venus, that's another 6. So you use a 2-degree orb either way for a midpoint to be exact. So Salacia is at the midpoint of Saturn and Venus. So this is talking about structured water created with love, because even remember years ago, Masaru Emoto's work with water, those stunning images, you can easily find online. When people sent hate to the water, the crystallography was all distorted and asymmetrical. When they sent love to the water, it became beautifully structured. These fabulous, symmetrical, exquisite structures. So we changed the structure of the water by sending love to it. That's just such a perfect expression of this. So I think we are going to get much clearer that we are in a feedback loop with the consciousness of water as we bless it and send love to it before we consume it. That creates more loving structure within ourselves. We then obviously urinated out back into the universal water system, and other people pick up more loving structured water. We're in a whole feedback loop. Think of just the simple power of that. This is all for free, guys. This is all for free, to send love to your water, to interact with that higher consciousness, which I believe water is, a creator consciousness, and how that affects the health of every cell, and how we broadcast that out just in our energy, but also in the water itself, the urine, which then goes back into the system. I think this is incredibly exciting, and there's something really profound here, which I'm barely touching the surface here. But also we have Jupiter's reinforcing all of this. Jupiter in Cancer, the expansion of our understanding of water, is also in a square to Venus and Salacia here. So, Jupiter is higher mind, it's knowledge, it's expansion of knowledge in a water sign, and squaring Salacia linked to mermaid energy, seawater, photonic light, and Venus to do with love. So there's something very big in here about expanding our understanding of water and light information in water. I also think this square is linked to fertility issues. There's some very big issues around fertility that you may be aware of right across the world. I think it's particularly marked in the West. Of course, Jupiter in Cancer, this is the sign of motherhood, ruled by the moon, is all about fertility and issues linked to that. It's square to the two female principles here of Venus and the moon, very obvious ones in our traditional planets when we think of feminine planets. And so that's kind of emphasizing that action is needed. And what also, this is actually a T-square because it's also square to the dwarf planet Makemake, which is almost 12 degrees of Libra. Now, Makemake is linked to the creator god of the Rapa Nui people on Easter Island. And you remember, it isn't just mythology, it's actual history that island was devastated by European sailors and pirates who laid waste the land. They chopped down the trees, they brought in disease, and eventually Easter Island was just down to, I think, something crazy like 111 residents. But because they understood working with cycles of nature, they were able to regenerate the ecosystems and get Easter Island back to health. So there's a very powerful regenerative energy and symbolism operating here with Makemake. And also we have Homer to do with regeneration as well, in a quindicile, obsessive 165-degree aspect to the moon and Venus. We've got to do something about issues around fertility, but also this is linked to the divine feminine, isn't it? Moon and Venus. You know, if we're looking to the traditional planets for the divine feminine, we would look to the Moon and Venus, and we would also actually look to the dwarf planet Vada, you know, quintessential divine feminine. There's just so much in here. So I also think that we are likely over the next 12 months to see some very strong female leaders coming in. Female Moon Venus leaders, Aries, who are not passive in any way. They are here to take action, to stand for love, to stand with compassion, but they are going to be strong women to make a change. So that's a prediction I would make. And also wanting to birth a world, these female leaders, that operates from an inclusive love. That's what Chiron and Eris are about, an inclusive love, demanding that everyone is heard. Those people who felt victimized, Chiron not part of the system, Eris excluded, disenfranchised, you know, on the periphery, wounded by the system, Chiron. These new female leaders, more divine feminine energy, are going to make sure everybody is included. We are one humanity. Also, and just to touch on this again, the fact we have Mercury so tightly conjunct the North Node here, both at 8 degrees of Pisces, and Mercury is emphasized here because it moves, is stationary direct on this day, 20th. Really emphasizing that the collective soul's path of growth is more loving and more intuitive. Pisces. Pisces is to do with no boundaries, no limits, infinite possibilities, things that Dr. David Clements has talked about. You know, the limits are off now in terms of what we can achieve. This feeling of expansiveness and spaciousness in our consciousness that many of us are feeling. Also, other things I'd like just to mention, the Sun is in a sextile to Uranus. This emphasizes the rebellious, revolutionary, awakening energy I've talked about, the truth coming to light. The centaur Nessus, which I've mentioned in previous videos, Nessus, I'll put a link for the myth below rather than go through it all, but the myth itself is linked to gaslighting and blood, poison blood. It's pretty, you know, grisly myth, to be honest. Melanie Reinhardt, the astrologer, is the real expert, I think, on that. And it is at the midpoint here of Mars, the ruler of this Aries equinox, and the Sun. The Sun defining the Aries equinox by moving into 0 of Aries. So, because if we move 7 degrees from 14, we get 21 where Nessus is, and then we move another 7, you know, we're pretty much at the Sun. So it is at the midpoint, emphasizing this, that the kind of simple way to remember Nessus is the buck stops here. Enough. The buck stops here. And I think you'll understand very well in the current climate what I'm talking about here. Remember also at the total lunar eclipse we had dwarf planet Orcus conjunct the moon at that big full moon, that total lunar eclipse. Orcus is the Etruscan god of the underworld who punishes people who violated their sacred or divine law, or the sacred and divine law. So we're getting some very clear themes. We also have Jupiter in a semi-square to Uranus here. This is continuing these themes of truth, awakening, and justice. And just to pick up also a couple of dwarf planets here I haven't mentioned yet, Ixion is in a negative expression, someone who feels no remorse. In the myth, he murdered his father-in-law without compunction and was spun off on a burning wheel into eternity, but he has a very light, bright side of moving beyond the mainstream and just, you know, almost whistling a tune as he goes with his knapsack on his back. finding joy in simplicity. And I think so much of us are yearning for simplicity right now. Our values are changing, I think, very rapidly and radically. And Kwawa is really part of the solution going forwards, because Kwawa is all about spirit consciousness and dancing and singing the world into being at a different level in community. So it's always linked to community, and it's always linked to firstly raising your frequency through song and dance, coming together collectively, and then you set your intention to manifest. You don't try and manifest from chaos. But it's very, very beautiful. Alan Clay describes Kwawa as spirit consciousness. And also, just to sort of echo that, he describes Maki Maki as bringing spirit into our lives, as a sacred consciousness, seeing the earth, humanity, and the cosmos as one organic whole, which of course it is. So we have a lot in this chart. And I'll just stop sharing here, because I looked at the astrocartography for this Aries equinox, and the sun, and remember it's conjunct Saturn and Neptune, is angular. So this means these geographies are likely to come into the news, into prominence in some way over the next 12 months. So angular through Saudi Arabia, Iran, interestingly, and Russia. Angular on the midheaven, that's to do with the government, the leadership through Greenland. It's amazing how often Greenland is coming up in the astrology. You think it's a fairly obscure geography, but again and again it seems to be coming up in the astrology. Also on the IC, the Sun, Saturn, Neptune coming out in the IC through Eastern Australia. So all these things I've been talking about throw these geographies into prominence. And I just did note as well that at the time of the Aries equinox, Pluto is on the midheaven, the leadership, the government, running through Eastern Canada, where of course you have Ottawa, Eastern US, where of course you have Washington DC, and also Eastern Mexico. Well, there's already I think a leader of a drug cartel has already been taken out in the last couple of days in Mexico. So we are going to go through a phenomenal 12 months of rapid dynamic outer events. And so, is there war and reactivity out in the world? You bet your bottom dollar. Absolutely. Is that the wolf you want to feed? Do you want to see more of those things? Is there a timeline for compassion, peace, and unconditional love? Absolutely. Is that the wolf you want to feed? So, because, and I've mentioned this, I think I mentioned this in the last video, that I'd like to promote something called the big slowdown. The big slowdown internally. As things get wilder on the outside and more people getting more reactive, and have you seen this and have you seen that and can you believe and have you seen that and have you seen this name and this person and who'd have thought it, and all of that. Turn inwards. Dedicate yourself to the big slowdown. Almost see that in capital neon lights. Because if we can stay calm and centered and peaceful in the midst of this storm where all this is swirling about us, that's actually our mastery. That's our mastery. Because that isn't spiritual bypassing. We're aware of what's going on in the world. We're choosing not to react to it. We're choosing to stay on our eagle's perch, if you like, having been made aware of it. And it isn't selfish either, because we are going to broadcast that calmness out to the collective. It's actually service to others. So as well as mastering your own state of being, it's the best service, or one of the ways we can give great service to the collective, because we are broadcasting that calm, peace, and unconditional love back to the collective. And there's 10 tons of evidence about how we do. We can't not broadcast our frequency. Every single one of us is doing that every single moment. You can't not do that. And so I'd really like to close with it. This is a quote that I've used in a video quite some time ago, but it's just so right for now. And it's a quote from the brilliant, I think he won Nobel Prize, chemist and physicist Ilya Prigogine. Prigogine, I think is how you spell his name. I put the spelling below the video. And it's quite a well-known quote, but he said, when a complex system is far from equilibrium, small islands of coherence in a sea of chaos have the capacity to shift the entire system to a higher order. I'll repeat that. When a complex system is far from equilibrium, small islands of coherence in a sea of chaos have the capacity to shift the entire system to a higher order. You, listening to this right now, are a small island of coherence. Every single one of you has the potential to be that small island of coherence. And that's mastery, and that's co-creating power at its best. So emblazon on your consciousness, heart coherence, and just really step forwards, because I can feel this rising energy of, yeah, we can see the horror all around us, but boy, are we convinced we are not going to allow this to happen again. And we can do that through love. We don't have to do that through shouting. We can do that through love, being so overwhelming that it's impossible at that frequency for those things to happen again. That's my big request, and really, I feel quite emotional now, actually, really big plea to you all. So I'm putting this out a few days before there's a Pisces lunation coming up. It's a Pisces new moon, and I'll be putting that video out in the next few days. But this is a more important one, because remember, it's for 12 months. It's not just for March 20th. It's the 12-month backdrop to what we're going to be experiencing. So take it in that spirit. God bless. Thank you so much for listening, and be back soon. It's actually a busy week next week, so I'll be back soon with other videos. God bless. Thank you for listening. Bye for now.